Chapter 1. The Girl with the Raspy Voice. Josie Blake didn't feel like a main character in anybody's story, not even her own. The Rusty Lantern Bar hummed around her in waves of laughter, plinking bottles, and tired country songs from an ancient jukebox. She moved through it all with practiced ease, balancing a tray of beers in one hand, a rag tucked into her apron, grief tucked somewhere deep where no one could see it. Her mother had been gone 3 months. 3 months since the machines went quiet. 3 months since the medical bills swallowed what little savings they had. 3 months of pretending she wasn't still listening for a voice that would never answer. "Joe." Tommy, the owner, waved from behind a bar. "You done with that table?" She dropped the last beer off, forcing a smile. "All set." He gave her that look, the one he used when he was about to ask for something he knew she'd resist. "Place is packed tonight. Think you could give us a song?" Her stomach tightened. Singing had been her mother's thing, her joy, her escape. The last time Josie had sung more than a line or two, her mother had been in a hospital bed, eyes closed, fingers limp in hers. "I don't know, Tommy. It's busy." Exactly why they need it. He jerked his chin toward the little wooden stage. "Just one. That old blues one you do. Folks love you." She hesitated, fingers curling around the edge of her tray. Maybe it would hurt. Maybe it would help. Staying silent for 3 months hadn't made anything easier. "Fine," she muttered. "One song." The mic stand waited under the weak amber lights like a dare. Josie stepped up, nerves prickling under her skin. The chatter dimmed as a few regulars noticed her. She wrapped her fingers around the microphone. It felt heavier than she remembered. Then she saw him. A man sat alone in the back booth, half in shadow. Dark jacket, clean lines, posture relaxed in a way that screamed confidence. His face was cut sharp in the low light. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes fixed on her with unnerving focus. He wasn't staring like a drunk trying to be cute. He was studying her. Josie's pulse stumbled. She looked away, sucked in a breath, and let the first note scrape up through her chest. Her voice came out rough, smoky, threaded with all the nights she hadn't slept, and the tears she refused to shed in public. It wasn't pretty. It was honest. She sang an old blues song her mother loved, low and aching, about losing something you never got to fully have. The bar quieted. Glasses were set down, conversations fading to murmurs. For 3 minutes, the world shrank to a spotlight, and the burn of sound in her throat. When she finished, there was a beat of silence. Then applause, scattered at first, then loud. Tommy whooped, someone whistled. Josie's hand shook as she set the mic back in its stand. She kept her head down. Compliments slid off her on the way back to the bar. "Nice voice." "Dan, girl. You should be in Nashville." "Sure. With what money?" "Josie." She stopped. The voice came from just behind her shoulder. Deep, smooth, threaded with something that made the tiny hairs on her neck rise. She turned. It was him, the man from the booth. Up close, he was even more intimidating. All sharp edges and easy charisma. His eyes looked darker at this distance, focused entirely on her, like the rest of the room didn't exist. "Yeah?" she asked, hating how thin her voice sounded. "Josie Blake." He said it like a fact he'd already verified. "That's your name, right?" "Who wants to know?" His mouth corked as if she'd amused him. "I'm Jake. Jake Rivers." The name tugged at something in her memory. She'd seen it on album credits, on music blogs she'd scrolled through late at night when she wanted to feel close to a world she'd never touch. She stared. "The producer?" "So I'm told." He slid a card across the bar toward her. "That voice doesn't belong in this place." Her fingers hovered over the card without picking it up. "And where does it belong, exactly?" "In a studio." His tone was matter-of-fact, like he was telling her the sky was blue. "In a room built to carry what you just did to a lot more people than this." She laughed once, the sound small and disbelieving. "You're serious?" "Yes." He didn't blink. "I don't waste my time." The world tilted, just a little. "I don't have money," she blurted. "I don't have training. I've never even been on a plane. My mom's—" Her throat closed around the word gone. She swallowed it back. "This is my life." Jake's expression didn't soften exactly, but something shifted. Less assessment, more interest. "I'm not asking what you have," he said quietly. "I'm asking whether you want more than this." The question landed like a stone in her chest. Of course she did. She wanted stages and spotlights, and enough money that the power bill didn't make her stomach twist. She wanted not to feel like she'd wasted whatever scrap of talent she'd been given. She also wanted her mother back. Life didn't care what she wanted. She finally picked up the card. Sleek, expensive. The kind of thing that didn't belong anywhere near her chipped red nail polish. "There's a number on the back," Jake said. "I'm in town for 2 days. If you're ready to stop letting this place eat you alive, call me." "That's a bit dramatic," she said. He shrugged. "You sing like someone who's running out of air, Josie. You know I'm not wrong." Her cheeks heated. "You don't know anything about me." His gaze held hers. Steady, unsettling. "I know enough." Without waiting for an answer, he turned and walked toward the door, his stride unhurried, his presence making space around him without trying. She stared at his card. Jake Rivers, River Sound Productions, Los Angeles. The letters blurred. 2 days. 2 days to decide if she was brave enough to leave everything she'd ever known, or if she was going to spend the rest of her life singing to drunks in a bar that smelled like spilled beer and defeat. She slid the card into her apron pocket like it was a secret. Her heart wouldn't stop pounding for the rest of the night. Chapter 2. 2 days. Josie didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard her own voice spilling out into the rusty lantern, raw and too honest. She saw the stranger in the shadows, Jake Rivers, watching her like she was something rare. Her brain kept replaying the way he'd said, "I don't waste my time," until the words vibrated under her skin. By the time gray morning light leaked through the thin curtains of her tiny rental, her body ached with exhaustion. Bills sat stacked on the rickety dresser, a small accusing tower she pretended not to see. She pulled the card from her apron pocket. It looked even more out of place in her bedroom than it had behind the bar. Sleek black, embossed letters. Jake Rivers, River Sound Productions, Los Angeles. She'd already Googled him on her phone at 3 a.m., thumb trembling. The search results had been a gut punch. Platinum records, award photos, interviews where other artists talked about him like he was half tyrant, half miracle. He was real. Important. The kind of man people took seriously in an industry that chewed up most voices and spat them back out. It didn't make any sense that he found her in a dingy bar in Alabama. She set the card on the chipped nightstand and made coffee she couldn't taste. Every few minutes she touched the card again, as if it might vanish if she took her eyes off it. By the time she walked into the rusty lantern that evening, the place looked the same as always. Sticky floors, dull lights, the faint smell of fried food clinging to the walls. But it felt wrong, like a set she'd already stepped off of, like a place she was either about to leave or sink into forever. Tommy watched her refill the ice bin, his brows pulling together. "You look like someone stole your dog." "Don't have a dog," she said automatically. "You know what I mean." His voice softened. "You okay, kid?" She almost said no, almost told him about the card in her pocket and the producer who'd looked at her like a problem he intended to solve. Instead, she forced a smile. "Just tired." Tommy held her gaze for a second, clearly not buying it, but he let it go. "Go easy tonight, yeah?" The evening dragged. Josie moved on autopilot, taking orders, dropping off drinks, laughing when she was supposed to. Her mind buzzed too loud to focus. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped, half expecting Jake to walk in again. Right before midnight, as she wiped down the bar, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Unknown number. Her heart lurched. She glanced at Tommy, busy arguing with the distributor on the phone, then ducked toward the back hallway, pressing the call to her ear. "Hello?" Her voice came out thinner than she liked. "Is this Josie?" The voice was deep, smooth, and unmistakable, even through a cheap speaker. Her fingers tightened around the rag in her hand. "Yeah, it's Jake." "I figured," she managed. "I'm not in the habit of begging," he said. but I am in the habit of not wasting potential. I leave tomorrow. If you're coming, you need to decide tonight." The bar's neon sign flickered at the far end of the hall. Someone laughed too loudly near the pool table, the sound oddly distant. "Just like that?" she whispered. "You have nothing tying you here anymore." His tone stayed even, not cruel, just unflinching. "You can keep singing to drunks who forget you by morning. Or you can come to LA and find out what that voice can do." The words hit every bruise inside her. Her knees wobbled and she sank onto a bar stool, the wood sticky against her palm. "You make it sound easy," she said. "It's not," he said. "It'll be the hardest thing you've ever done. I'm not promising fame. I'm promising work. Discipline. A real shot." "That's it." "And what do you get?" she asked, because letting him make all the declarations without questioning him felt too dangerous. "A voice unlike anything on my roster," he said simply, "and the satisfaction of not walking away from something extraordinary when I hear it." Heat rushed to her face. "You think I'm extraordinary?" "I think if you say no," he replied, "you'll spend the next 10 years wondering if this call could have changed your life." Silence opened up between them. Her mother's voice floated up from someplace carved deep inside her chest. "You got something special, baby. Don't bury your light just because the world's been unkind, Joe." Josie swallowed hard. If I came, how would that even work? I don't have money for a ticket or a place to stay or—" "I handle logistics," he cut in. "You pack a bag, and you show up. I have your ticket and a place arranged, short-term, safe, and not a favor you have to sleep off. You're coming to work, not audition for my bed." Her cheeks flamed even though he couldn't see her. "Didn't say I thought that." "You were thinking it," he said, matter of fact. He wasn't wrong. "And if you're lying?" She pushed. "Then you walk away the moment something feels wrong," he said. "No song, no opportunity is worth ignoring your instincts. But I'm not lying." He said it like a fact, not ego. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Give me until closing." "You have until 2, he said. "After that, I assume you've chosen Alabama." The line went dead. Josie stared at her phone, then at the card in her pocket, then at the tip jar, the scuffed floor, the row of familiar bottles behind the bar. 2 hours. She finished closing with shaking hands, wiping tables until the wood shone, stacking chairs, counting out the register while Tommy locked up. He clapped her on the shoulder on his way out, told her to get some sleep. The moment the door clicked behind him, the bar felt too quiet, too small. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty. Crickets buzzed in the distance. The air smelled like rain that couldn't quite commit. She could go home, crawl into bed, tell herself the world was safer small, that it was better to know the shape of her cage than to risk falling on her face trying to escape it. Or she could gamble everything on a man she'd known for one night, in a city she'd never seen, on a talent she wasn't even sure she deserved. Her feet started moving before her brain fully caught up. Home. The little rental looked even more temporary as she walked through it. She grabbed the cheap suitcase from the closet, the one she'd bought years ago for a trip that never happened. Clothes, toothbrush, a worn photo of her and her mom at some county fair, both of them laughing at something just off camera. The note her mother had taped to the bathroom mirror during the worst of the hospital days, "You're stronger than you think," was carefully peeled free and tucked into an inside pocket. Her hands shook as she zipped the suitcase. At 1:50 a.m., she set Jake's card on the kitchen table. Suitcase by the door, heart thudding like it might punch straight through her ribs. "At least I won't die wondering," she whispered. At 7:30, she stood at the bus station, concrete freezing her feet through thin sneakers, suitcase handle sweaty in her hand. The sky was washed-out blue, the sun already too bright. People milled around with backpacks and duffel bags, eyes half awake and half elsewhere. Her heart pounded so loud she almost didn't hear when someone said her name. Josie. She turned. Jake stood by the curb, dark jacket, dark eyes, looking completely at ease, like bus stations at the edge of nowhere were just another meeting point on his calendar. He looked exactly the same as he had in the bar, and somehow more dangerous in daytime. Too put together, too certain, like he hadn't just split her entire life into before and after with a phone call. His gaze dropped to the suitcase, then lifted back to her face. "You came," he said quietly. Josie nodded. Words felt fragile, like if she tried to use them, she might crack open. A slow, dangerous smile touched his mouth. Not cruel, just certain. "Good," he said. "Let's go." He turned toward the entrance, like it was the most obvious thing in the world that she would follow. For a second, she looked back at the small town skyline. The water tower, the faded billboard, the line of low buildings she knew too well. Then she tightened her grip on the suitcase handle and stepped after him. If main characters were made anywhere, she figured, it had to start with a moment like this. Chapter 3: A Different Sky. Los Angeles didn't look real at first. From the plane window, the city sprawled out like somebody had spilled light across the ground. Golden veins of freeway. Clusters of skyscrapers reaching up as if they were trying to touch a sky that didn't care. Everything seemed too big, too bright, too much. Josie pressed her forehead lightly to the glass. Alabama had never looked like this. Her whole life fit in the small carry-on in the overhead bin and the suitcase checked beneath the plane, and suddenly that felt impossibly fragile. Her stomach swooped. Across the aisle, Jake had spent most of the flight working on his tablet, headphones in, brow furrowed as he scrolled through what looked like endless tracks and notes. Even here, thousands of feet in the air, he seemed anchored, thumb tapping an absent rhythm against his thigh, concentration coiled tight. When the plane finally bumped down onto the runway, her spine jolted. People around them started unlocking their phones and unbuckling their belts before the sign dimmed. Jake didn't move until the chime sounded. Then, he slid his tablet into his bag with economical motions, like he'd done this 1,000 times. "Ready?" he asked, glancing over at her. Not even a little, she thought. Yeah, she lied, fingers trembling against the armrest. He studied her for half a second, as if weighing how much to call out the lie, then nodded once and stood, reaching into the overhead compartment. He pulled down her bag before she could get to it and handed it to her. "Stay close," he said as they shuffled off the plane and into the terminal. The airport swallowed her whole. Voices echoed, announcements droned, rolling suitcases rattled across shiny floors. Jake moved through the chaos like he owned the place, not looking back, trusting she'd keep up. He didn't sound worried when he told her to stay close. He sounded like a man used to navigating storms and expecting people to either keep pace or get left behind. She stayed close. Outside, the air was dry and strangely cool. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb, a driver in a crisp shirt already stepping forward to take her suitcase as if she weren't capable of lifting it herself. "I can get that," she started, but the words fell flat. The driver was already sliding it into the back. She climbed into the SUV's back seat and sank into soft leather that smelled expensive. Her hands rested uselessly on her knees, knuckles pale. Jake slid in beside her on the other side. The door shut with a muffled thud that felt oddly final. "You're quiet," he said, as the car pulled away from the curb. "There's a lot to look at," she answered, watching palm trees flick by in a blur and billboards shout at her from every direction. Hard to have thoughts and breathe at the same time. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You'll get used to it." She wasn't sure she wanted to, but she'd chosen this, chosen him, chosen the unknown over the safety of staying small. Traffic thickened as they merged onto a freeway, cars stacking up in glittering lines. Los Angeles rose around them, clusters of glass and steel, flashes of graffiti, a sky that seemed too wide to belong to any single person. "Where are we going?" she asked, because the silence and her heartbeat were too loud. "Your place first," he said. "Then the studio." "My place," she repeated under her breath, as if the words might evaporate if she wasn't careful. "Short-term rental," he clarified. "Month to month, until we know what we're dealing with. Close to the studio. Safe building. No photographers lurking outside." "Are photographers gonna lurk?" she asked, half joking, half panicked. "Not yet," he said, utterly serious. "That's the point. You get time to work before anyone decides you're worth chasing." Her pulse skittered. "And if I'm not?" He turned his head away from the window to look at her fully, eyes dark and clear. If I thought that was a possibility, you wouldn't be here. There it was again. That certainty. Unapologetic, unsoftened. It warmed something inside her and terrified her in equal measure. The SUV slipped off the freeway into a quieter neighborhood. Trees lining the street, low buildings with balconies and potted plants, the kind of place people who had routines and grocery lists lived. The driver stopped outside a mid-rise building with a glass entry and key code panel. Jake stepped out first, then opened her door before the driver could move. "Come on," Jake said. "Let's get you settled." The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and cleaner. A woman at the front desk looked up, eyes flicking from Jake to Josie and softening with recognition. "Morning, Mr. Rivers," she said. "Hey, Lila." He rested his forearms on the counter like they were old acquaintances. "Keys ready for Blake?" Lila smiled at Josie. "Welcome to LA, Miss Blake. You're in 5B. Elevators to your right." Keys. Elevator. 5B. It didn't feel real. In the elevator, the silence pressed in. Jake hit the button and leaned back against the rail, watching her. "You can still walk away," he said quietly. "Nothing's recorded. No contract signed. If this is too much, you go home and we forget it." She looked at him sharply. "Is that what you want?" A muscle worked along his jaw. "What I want doesn't matter if you're going to choke the second a mic is in front of you. This only works if you're all in." She swallowed, fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "I got on a plane, didn't I? I left everything I know. That feels pretty all in." His gaze dropped briefly to her hand, then lifted again. "Good." The elevator dinged. 5th floor. 5B was bright and small and shockingly clean. A couch, a little table, a kitchenette, a bedroom with a bed that didn't sag in the middle. Light spilled in through big windows, showing a patchwork of other buildings and a slice of sky. "Rent's covered for the first 2 months, Jake said as she stepped inside. "After that, we reevaluate based on how things are going in the studio." "That sounds like a polite way of saying, if you suck, we cut you loose," she said, only half teasing. "That's exactly what it is," he replied. "But I don't think you will." He crossed to the kitchen counter and set a stack of papers down. Printed details about the building, emergency numbers, a studio schedule with her name written in crisp black letters and a few time slots. Her name, on something that belonged to his world, not hers. "If anything feels off here, at the studio, anywhere, you tell me," he said. "You don't owe anyone anything you don't want to give. Not your time, not your story, not your body. Understood?" Heat rushed to her cheeks at the last word, even though his tone never dipped into suggestion. "Understood." He watched her for a second, as if making sure the message landed, then nodded. "I'll give you a couple hours to unpack and shower off the flight," he said. "Studio at 3. It's a 10-minute walk. I'll text you the address." "You're not picking me up in another spaceship car?" she asked, tilting her head toward the window in the street below. His mouth almost curved. "You need to know how to get there on your own. This is your life, not a field trip." Right, her life. That still sounded foreign. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing." She turned, heart doing that stupid stutter it had started doing around him. "Don't try to sound like anyone else," he said. "Every singer who moves here thinks they have to chase whatever's on the radio. That's not why you're here. We use what you've got. The rasp, the break in your tone, the way you pull on a word until it hurts. That's the point." "You say that like it's easy," she murmured. "It's not," he said. "But it's real. That's what I care about." Something in her chest loosened. "Okay. That's a promise?" he asked. She blinked. "To what? Be real?" "To not hide," he said. "Not in the booth." Her first instinct was to joke, to deflect. Instead, she nodded. "I'll try. That's all I need right now." He opened the door. "Keys are on the counter. Don't be late." He left her with a soft click of the door and the faint hum of the city outside. For a moment, Josie just stood there, the quiet pressing in after the constant noise of travel. Then she walked to the window and pressed a hand to the glass. The sky here looked different, too bright, too wide, but it was still sky. She was still her. Maybe that was enough. She unpacked slowly, touching each familiar item like it was proof she existed in both worlds at once. Alabama and LA. Grief and possibility. The girl who sang to drunks, and the one who'd gotten on a plane because a man who didn't waste his time had looked at her and said she could be more. By the time she locked the apartment behind her and followed the directions on her phone to the studio, her nerves buzzed so loud she could barely hear her own footsteps. The studio sat on a quiet side street, tucked between a coffee shop and a building covered in ivy. Inside, it smelled like coffee, cables, and possibility. A pane of glass separated the control room from the recording booth, which gleamed under soft lights. Cables coiled like sleeping snakes along the floor, and the mixing board looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. A woman with bright eyes and a messy bun looked up from a laptop. "You must be Josie. I'm Mia. I make sure Jake remembers to eat and occasionally stop him from turning into a complete machine." The joke loosened something in Josie's chest. Good to know someone's watching him. Someone has to. Mia's grin flashed, quick and warm. "He's been annoyingly smug about you, by the way. No pressure." "No pressure," Josie repeated weakly. Jake walked in a moment later, all in black, expression sharpened. This wasn't the man at the bus station or in the elevator. This was the producer. The room seemed to focus around him without trying. "Warm up," he said, nodding toward the booth. "Sing whatever you're comfortable with. I want to hear where you are naturally before we start pushing." "My ceiling," she said, remembering. He nodded once. "How far I can push you before you break." The words should have scared her. Maybe they did. But as she stepped into the booth and put the headphones on, she realized something else. She was afraid of failing, of sounding small and foolish, in a room built for big voices. But she was more afraid of going back, having never tried. Josie met her eyes through the glass. He stood there, arms folded, watching her with that same relentless focus that had pulled her out of a bar in Alabama and into this room. She thought of her mother's hand squeezing hers in that hospital bed, of the note on the bathroom mirror, of the girl who'd decided not to die wondering. Then she closed her eyes, pulled in a breath that tasted like coffee and nerves and new beginnings, and she sang. Chapter 4. Cracks in the Armor. The first full day in the studio tried to chew Josie up and spit her back out. By noon, her throat burned. By 3, her legs felt like she'd been standing in one place for years. By 5, she'd lost track of how many times Jake had said again. From the top, his voice came through the headphones. Calm. Unmoved. Breathe deeper on the second line. You're backing off right before it matters. She blew out a slow breath, fingers tightening around the headphones. "I can't feel my feet." "You don't sing with your feet," he said. "One more pass." She scowled at the glass, where he stood over the console like some dark, relentless force. Then she scowled at herself for being weirdly glad he wasn't just patting her on the head and telling her she was great. The track rolled again. Josie closed her eyes and let the verse rise up through her, scraping past all the things she'd tried not to think about. Hospital corridors that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Thin blankets and thinner smiles. Her mother's fingers tapping out rhythms on the bed when she was too tired to talk. Her chest tightened. She reached the line about losing home, and something in her broke. Her voice cracked, the words splintering into raw sound. She stumbled, swallowing hard, blinking fast. Silence fell in her headphones. Jake hit the talkback. "What just happened?" "Nothing," she said. The words sounded brittle. "Josie." She hated how he said her name, like it was a command and a promise at the same time. "I just lost it." She cleared her throat as if she could scrape the emotion away. "I'll do it again." "No." His tone shifted, still firm, but softer at the edges. "What was that?" "It's fine," she insisted. "Just a glitch." "Sounded like grief," he said. Her fingers dug into the padding of the headphones. "You don't know what that sounds like for me." "Maybe not," he said. "But I know what it sounds like when someone throws a wallop in the middle of a line. That verse landed where it was supposed to, and you ran from it." She stared at the lyric sheet, the black letters blurring. Losing home. Her throat felt too tight for air, let alone music. "Come out," he said quietly. take a break. She hesitated, then pushed the booth door open. The change in sound hit first, the dry quiet of the control room, the faint hum of equipment, a distant bump from a studio down the hall. Jake stood by the console, hands braced on the edge, jaw tense. Up close, he looked less like an unshakable machine, and more like a man holding too many things steady at once. He watched her cross the room and sink onto the worn couch along the back wall. "Talk to me." "About what?" she asked, staring at the carpet. "My tragic backstory? If it's strangling the song, yeah." He leaned one hip against the console, arms folded. "You don't have to give me everything, but I can't help you use something you won't even admit is there." Her laugh came out sharp. "You always this gentle? You're still standing, aren't you?" His gaze didn't waver. "Tell me what that line hit." The urge to deflect rose up thick and fast. Joke about being dramatic. Shrug it off. But there was nowhere for the truth to go in this room except out. The walls were made to catch sound. "She loved music," Josie said finally, the words scraping on the way out. "My mom, every Sunday morning she'd put on these old records and dance in the kitchen while breakfast burned." Jake's expression didn't change, but he seemed to listen harder. "She worked 3 jobs most of her life," Josie went on. "Never had more than $20 left after bills. But she'd hum, always. When I was little, she'd sing me to sleep. Later, when it got bad, the only singing I did was to hospital walls. I'd sing at night because the machines were loud, and I wanted her to have something else to listen to." Her throat closed. She looked away. "You took care of her," he said quietly. "I watched her fade," she corrected. "There's a difference." He didn't argue. The silence between them stretched, heavy but not empty. "I keep thinking if I'd left earlier," she forced out. "If I'd gone somewhere and made money and done something, maybe I could have gotten better doctors. Maybe she'd still be—" "Stop." His voice cut through, low but firm. She flinched. "What? Truth makes you uncomfortable?" "What you're doing isn't truth," he said. "It's punishment. You stayed. You sat beside her when it hurt. You sang to her when no one else did. That doesn't make you weak, Josie. That makes you loyal." "Loyalty didn't save her," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But walking out on her might have killed more than her body. Don't rewrite what you did just because you didn't get the outcome you wanted." Something in his tone made her look up. There was a shadow in his eyes, something that looked an awful lot like familiarity. Guilt, maybe. Regret. He understood this territory too well. "What happened to you?" she asked before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened. "We're not talking about me." "So, you get to pick me apart?" she said, a brittle edge creeping into her voice. "But you're off limits?" "I'm not your project," he said. "You're mine." The words should have pissed her off. Instead, they sent a strange little shiver through her. He straightened, pushing off the console. "Come back in." She blinked. "That's it? No more therapy?" "That wasn't therapy," he said. "That was you telling the truth for 10 seconds. Now we use it. Don't run from that line this time. Sing like you're singing to her, not to me, not to some imaginary audience. Let it hurt." "That your strategy?" she asked. "Push people until they bleed?" "If there's something worth bleeding for," he said. "Yeah." Their eyes held. Something in his cracked for a split second, gone before she could name it. She went back into the booth. This time, when the track started, she didn't brace against the words. She let them hit. She thought about her mother in that hospital bed, about the way her fingers had still tapped rhythm on the blanket, even when she could barely swallow, about the Sunday mornings with burned toast and scratchy records, about all the small, ordinary things that had felt like home. The line about losing it came, and she let the ache rip straight through her voice. It wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, it was raw and jagged and too close to crying. It was real. When the last note faded, the silence in her headphones felt different, dense, charged. She lifted her head. Through the glass, Jake stood exactly where he'd been, hands braced on the console, but his head was bowed slightly, like the sound had landed in him too. He took a breath, hit the talkback. That's the one. A shaky laugh escaped her, more relief than humor. Her heart pounded so hard her chest hurt. Her throat felt scraped raw, but underneath the soreness was something solid. Pride. Maybe even a little peace. She took off the headphones and stepped out of the booth. The room felt smaller now, like they'd filled it with something that hadn't been there when she walked in. Was that so hard? He asked. Yes, she said honestly. His mouth tipped, just a little. Good. If it's easy, it's not worth listening to. On the way out that night, her steps dragged. Every muscle ached. The LA air felt colder than it had that morning, cutting through her thin jacket as they stepped onto the sidewalk. We'll get used to the hours, Jake said, falling into step beside her. Tomorrow we start earlier. She groaned. I can't feel my soul. That's how you know you're doing it right. She glanced over at him. The edge of his mouth had curved an inch. It took her a second to realize he'd tried to make a joke. A small one, dry and a little crooked, but a joke. A crack in the armor. She looked forward again, the ache in her chest lighter than it had been in a long time. Maybe bleeding for something didn't always mean losing it. Sometimes, she thought, it meant finally letting it live somewhere besides the dark. Chapter 5. Invisible Lines. Days blurred into a rhythm that was nothing like the life Josie had known. Mornings meant vocal warm-ups and tea that tasted like medicine. Afternoons meant studio lights, scribbled lyrics, and Jake's voice in her headphones, saying again until the words stopped sounding like English. Nights meant takeout containers on her coffee table, and muscles too tired to do more than scroll mindlessly until sleep dragged her under. She traded sticky floors and jukebox static for soundproof walls and a control room that felt like the cockpit of something moving too fast to bail out of. Jake had rules. Be on time. No late nights before recording days. No random hangers-on in the studio. No social media posts he hadn't okayed. You're being dramatic, she'd muttered the first time he swiped her phone from her hand and deleted a selfie she'd almost posted from the lobby couch. I'm being careful, he'd replied, thumbs moving with terrifying speed. You don't get a do-over on your first impression. The world doesn't need photos of you half asleep with a bag of chips. I wasn't half asleep. You will be, he'd said dryly. Trust me. It bothered her sometimes, the way he moved pieces around, without always asking her. Schedule, her image, the way he kept talking about when people would see her online like it was already decided. But it was hard to argue with results. Her range stretched. Her control sharpened. She learned how to shape a note instead of just throwing it at the wall and hoping it stuck. She learned which T's soothed her throat and which made it worse. How to mark breathing on a lyric sheet so she didn't blow all her air on the first line. How to hear the difference between almost and there. And she learned the sound of him humming her melodies under his breath when he didn't think she was listening. Every time she stepped into the booth now, fear still came. But it didn't win. It sat in the corner, watching, while something else, something fiercer, took the mic. One Wednesday, she arrived at the studio to find the lights already low and the monitors glowing. Jake stood at the console, shoulders tight, eyes on the screen. A rough mix played through the speakers, filling the room with a voice that made her heartbeat stutter. Her voice. Not the way she heard it in her own head, thin and uncertain and too raw, but bigger, layered with harmonies, the rasp shaped into something intentional instead of a flaw she couldn't scrub out. Is that me? She asked, stopping just inside the doorway. He glanced back. His jaw was clenched. His fingers tapped a sharp rhythm on the console, like they didn't know how to be still. Yeah, he said. Rough mix. She moved closer without meaning to, drawn forward like the sound had hucked into her ribs. The verse rolled over her, words she'd helped write, notes they'd fought for. The chorus hit, and her own voice punched through the speakers like it belonged there. That's me? She whispered. That's you, he said. You did that. Emotions surged up, thick and unexpected. You helped. I guided, he said. You sang. Such a small distinction. It mattered. She blinked hard, looking at the screen instead of him. Her name glowed in neat text in the session title. Seeing it there felt like seeing it carved into wet cement. He watched her face for a moment, expression unreadable, then looked back at the waveforms. We're gonna finish 2 full tracks by the end of the month. After that, we start talking singles. Singles, she repeated, dizzy. As in, actual release? People actually hearing this? Yes. Panic fluttered up immediately, batting against her ribs like trapped wings. What if they hate it? What if they don't? He countered. I'm serious, Jake. So am I. He turned, leaning back against the console, folding his arms. The low light, sculpted shadows along his cheekbones made his eyes look darker. You don't get to control how people react, he said. They'll love it, hate it, ignore it. That's their business. Yours is to make something you can live with. If you bury it again, that's on you. His words stung because they were true. She'd buried her voice once already, suffocating under grief and medical bills, and the belief that dreams were for people with more options. You sound like you're talking from experience, she said quietly. His gaze flicked away, back to the screen. We're not talking about me. Something in his silence made her think of ghosts, of songs never released, of clients he'd walked away, or people he'd pushed too far, of mistakes he kept hidden under all that control. She didn't press. Not yet. But she filed the crack away with all the others. That night, back in her apartment, the first anonymous call came. She almost missed it, half asleep on the couch with some trashy reality show flickering muted across the TV. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She groaned, rolled over, and fumbled for it. Unknown number. She thumbed it on. Hello? Silence. No static. No breathing. Just dead, open quiet. Hello? She tried again, more annoyed than afraid. Look, if this is a telemarketer, I already don't have money. Nothing. The line went dead. She stared at the screen for a second, then shrugged it off. Wrong number. Pocket dial. Whatever. She was nobody yet. Who would bother calling her on purpose? 2 nights later, it happened again. And again the next. Same time. Same unknown number. Same silence on the other end. A prickle of unease slipped under her skin. She almost ignored it, almost convinced herself it was a glitch. Instead, still wired from a late session, she mentioned it to Jake the next day as casually as she could, while Mia fetched coffee. He didn't take it casually. Why didn't you tell me the first time? He asked, brows pulling together. Because it's nothing, she said, hitching a shoulder. People misdial. Some robocall got confused. It's fine. 3 times from the same number? He pressed. She hesitated. It could still be nothing. There's a lot of nothing that isn't good, he said. Don't ignore it. Next time it happens, send me the number. His protectiveness sent a strange warmth through her, layered over the unease, the feeling of a net tightening under her without her asking for it. Do you think it's a fan? She asked, half joking, half hoping. You don't have fans yet, he said bluntly, which is why this bothers me. No one outside this building in this city should even know who you are yet. The idea that anyone noticed her at all, enough to be weird about it, felt surreal. She tried to laugh it off. Maybe you're just paranoid. I've earned my paranoia, he replied, voice flat. Let me worry about it. She did. But that night, when the phone stayed silent, she lay awake a long time anyway, watching the faint city glow on her ceiling, wondering exactly what kind of world she'd stepped into, and how much of Jake's control came from power, and how much came from fear of what that world could do. Chapter 6. Fault Lines. By the end of the second week, Josie knew 2 things for sure. 1. Her body could do far more than she'd ever asked of it. 2. So could her heart, though it complained a lot louder about it. They moved on from the aching ballad that had wrung her out, and into something sharper, mid-tempo, restless, the musical equivalent of pacing in a too-small room. The verses snapped, the chorus climbed, and the bridge felt like a dare. She loved it. Jake kept tearing it apart. In the second verse, he said from behind the console, you're slipping into imitation. You're trying to sound like whatever you've been listening to on the radio. Stop that. You told me to actually listen to the radio, she shot back through the mic. You said I needed to hear what's current. I said hear it, not become it, he replied. Again, and this time, stop chasing someone else's echo. Her temper, already frayed from hours of takes, snapped a little. You know, you're very generous with the criticism for someone who doesn't actually have to sing. That's why you're in the booth and I'm out here, he said. We all suffer. Mia snorted softly from her spot by the laptop, trying and failing to turn it into a cough. Josie rolled her eyes and lifted the headphones back over her ears. The track queued up, the beat hit. She delivered the first verse clean, let the rasp ride the edges of her notes like he'd taught her, leaned into the attitude of the lyric. I'm done with waiting, done with asking nice. If the door won't open, I'll break my own way in twice. The second verse came, and with it, the ghost of every polished pop girl she'd ever heard, smooth, shiny, perfected. She pushed harder, trying to match that gleam. When she finished, she knew before he said anything that he wasn't happy. The talkback crackled. What did we just talk about? About how you're impossible? She said sweetly. Cute. He didn't smile. Get out here. She yanked the headphones off and stepped into the control room. Heartbeat thudding in annoyed time with the kick drum still echoing in her chest. You do realize I'm trying, right? She said, crossing her arms. I do, he said. That's the problem. He hit play. Her voice filled the room, big, bright, technically solid. It also sounded like it could have been anyone. He let the second verse roll, then cut it and switched to a clip from an earlier take. Her tone on the rougher pass was imperfect, a little off the beat, the rasp scraping hard at the edges of the melody. It also sounded like no one else. Do you hear the difference? He asked. She did. She hated that she did. The second one's cleaner. The second one's safer, he corrected. You don't have the luxury of being generic, Josie. This town is full of pretty voices. Nobody needs another one. We need you. The words landed somewhere low in her stomach, dangerous and hot. You say that like you know who that is, she muttered. I'm still figuring it out. That's what this is for, he said. Not to turn you into something else. To strip off everything that isn't you. She looked at him, irritation and something sharper tangling inside her. You sound very sure about who gets to decide that. Your voice decides it, he said. I just listen. His tone was flat, but his eyes were intense, pinned on her like they could strip her down to the bone if she let them. It was too much. I need air, she said, grabbing her water bottle, before I start throwing microphones. Mia lifted a hand. Take 10, she said, like a referee calling a timeout. Outside, the late afternoon had softened into gold. The street was quieter now, the coffee shop next door humming low, the ivy on the neighboring building catching the light. Josie sat on the curb, elbows on her knees, water bottle dangling loosely from her fingers. Her throat throbbed, but it wasn't just from singing. She hated how much his opinion mattered, hated how one lifted eyebrow could make her feel 6 inches tall, hated how a single, rare line of praise could light her up from the inside for hours. Thought you were going to bolt for Alabama for a second there. She glanced over her shoulder. Jake stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, the usual sharpness of his posture softened by something like caution. You'd like that, wouldn't you? She said. Then you could say you tried and it was all my fault. I don't like wasting time, he said. Taking you on and then losing you 6 weeks in would be a serious waste of time. He came down the steps and walked over, stopping a few feet away. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean with an edge, like citrus over smoke. Not close enough to be casual. You're pushing shoulders when you sing, he said. That's why you're burning out so fast. You're forcing control instead of letting your breath do the work. She leaned back on her hands, squinting up at him. Are you capable of having a normal conversation that isn't about technique? Yes, he said. I just prefer the ones that are useful. Something like a smile flashed across his mouth and vanished. She wasn't sure if it was for her or at his own expense. We're hitting fault lines, he went on. That's good. Means you're getting close to something real enough to scare you. You can either back off or push through. And if I break? she asked quietly. Then we figure out how to put you back together in a way that works, he said. Not in a way that looks pretty on a poster. The honesty of it stole her breath for a second. Has this speech worked on other singers? She asked, trying to lighten it. Some, he said. Some left. And the ones who left, she asked, regret it? His gaze went distant for a moment, jaw going tight. One didn't get the chance. A chill slid down her spine. What does that mean? He shook his head. It's not a story I'm ready to tell. Power imbalance, remember, she said. You know everything about me. Hospital details and burned toast and my worst nights. Feels only fair I know if my producer is secretly a serial killer or something. I don't have time to kill people, he said dryly. Too busy fixing pitch issues. She huffed a laugh, but the tension didn't drop all the way. So if you're not a murderer, what are you? A man who made some bad calls with the wrong people, he said. And I don't intend to repeat that mistake. The wrong people, she echoed. You mean artists? He hesitated. An artist, he said at last. And someone who claimed to care about them. Neither of them handled power well. I'm not interested in that dynamic again. She sensed a name sitting unsaid between them, coiled like a live wire. Instinct told her not to touch it yet. So that's why all the rules, she said instead. No late nights, no extra people, no posts. Control the variables so nothing can blow up in your face. In our faces, he corrected. These things don't just hit me. You're not my father, she said, more sharply than she meant to. You don't get to tell me how to live. Then don't live in a way that makes this impossible, he shot back. You want the shot, you follow the process. You walk in here hungover before a session, we're done. You let people in who don't want you for the right reasons, we're done. I'm not babysitting your life. Heat rose in her chest, anger, yes, but underneath it, something that felt suspiciously like fear. Not of him, of losing this. And what if I tell you I don't want you managing me like I'm just some problem you're trying to fix? She asked. That I'm a person, not a project? His eyes flicked down to her mouth, just for a second, before returning to her eyes. Who says I don't know you're a person? The air between them thickened. The city sounds faded. Cars, distant music, a dog barking somewhere down the block. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and the low, steady way he was breathing. He stepped a little closer, enough that his shadow fell across her knees. The studio is my territory, he said, voice lower. In there, I push as hard as I need to. Out here, you set your own lines. If I cross them, you tell me. Her throat felt tight. And you'll listen? His jaw flexed. Yes. The word was simple. It sounded like it cost him something. She realized suddenly that this conversation, this willingness to be argued with, was as much of a crack in his armor as any rare almost smile. Okay, she said softly. Then maybe ease up on deleting my selfies. One corner of his mouth lifted. No promises. She snorted, tension loosening just enough to let her breathe again. He watched her for another heartbeat, then held out a hand. Come on, let's try again while your voice is still warm. She stared at his hand. His fingers were strong, calloused, smelling faintly of coffee and metal and the faint chemical tang of studio gear. Taking it felt like stepping over some line she couldn't fully see. She slid her hand into his anyway. He pulled her up with less effort than it should have taken. For a second, they were close. Too close. Her body brushed his. She felt the heat of him through cotton and denim, the steady thud of his heart as her palm landed briefly against his chest. His breath caught, just a little. It was the smallest sound. She felt it more than heard it. Her own pulse skittered. Then he stepped back, the space opening up again as if nothing had happened. As if the little jolt between them were just static, not something heavier. Fault lines, he said, almost to himself. We'll see where they settle. She followed him back inside, fingers still tingling, throat tight for reasons that had nothing to do with overuse. For the rest of the session, every time his voice came through her headphones, calm and precise and pushy as ever. It felt different, like there was a live wire under the floor between them. She sang anyway. If she was going to fall apart, she thought, she'd rather do it in a song than anywhere else. Stay tuned, the story continues. Come back for the next section and make sure you subscribe and click the notifications to be sure not to miss the next installments or any future stories. Thanks for listening, and I will see you for the rest of the story soon, I hope.